Good morning all and welcome to this webinar on cash flow planning and solvency for businesses. My name's Alex Makinson and I'll be taking you through the first part of today's webinar. This is a series of webinars that we've been running over at Mitchell Charlesworth over how we can support our business clients as they plan to look for life beyond COVID-19. Now, before we get started, a bit of housekeeping just to go through with you. You hopefully should be able to hear me, but just in case you can't or the audio does fail, you can log in with your mobile phone by calling the numbers on the screen, and you should be able to hear me through your mobile. I do recommend that you just jot these numbers down just in case the audio does fail throughout the webinar. Onto the technology issues. Hopefully we shouldn't have any technology issues today. However, it is a home broadband connection, so who knows what will happen. Fingers crossed we don't have any problems. Now, you're more than welcome to ask any questions. You should have a control box somewhere on your screen that will enable you to ask us questions. We will look to answer a couple of questions towards the end of the webinar. If for some reason we run out of time or we can't answer your questions, we will come back to you via your email address. Now, I've put on the screen here today our email addresses. You're more than welcome to send us an email at any point. You're welcome to send us an email after the webinar if there's any issues you want to discuss or go through with us. We will be recording this webinar, so we'll send you a copy of the recording and the slides out to you, so you're welcome to play them back at your leisure if you really want to. Hopefully you all know who we are. You've received our invitation, you clicked on the link and you know what we're all about. Now, the purpose of these webinars is probably to meet our philosophy at the bottom here, which is to be more than your accountants and help you and support you through this incredibly challenging period. And as I said, this is a series of webinars. We've had some good feedback from our previous webinars, and fingers crossed we'll have some good feedback for this one. Otherwise, I think I may be short. A little bit about your presenters here today. You get two for the price of one here. How good are we? As I said, my name's Alex Makinson. I've been an accountant for sort of 20 years or so, maybe 23. I deal with all aspects of businesses, from SMEs through to large corporates and PLCs. I'm often advising on strategic planning, growth and business strategy, hence why I'm here today talking to you on this sort of webinar. Well, I've also got Jeremy with us today. Jeremy is a partner and head of our corporate and recovery department over in our Manchester office. He's got 35 years worth of experience, so he's got a few more years on me. His specialities range quite widely, and they're shown on the screen today. And I know Jeremy as Inspector Morse. He'll hate me for saying that. Why? Because he's a principal witness for the Crown. He's acted as principal witness for the Crown many times at several trials. Now, we've got a jam-packed agenda to go through with you today. I'm going to be talking through the cash flow and the budget planning side of things, and Jeremy will be taking you through the financial solvency and risk. I think I got the short straw and Jeremy got the long straw. We'll let you decide on which are the better topics. Now, we are going to start with some of the basics when it comes to the cash flow. We've got a lot of businesses, a lot of people with us today. 88 attendees, would you believe, are with us this morning from a wide range of areas and businesses, some small, some larger. So please forgive me if I talk through some of the basics, but what we will do throughout the webinar is it will get progressively more involved as we start to go through it. So there will be something hopefully for everybody. So let's get started on the budget and cash flow. Now, we must admit we're living through probably the largest health and economic crisis in a generation. In my sort of 20+ years career, I've seen the economic impact of probably 9/11, two recessions, and the housing depression, but this one is quite unique. Never before has someone turned the business tap off and then slowly but surely tried to drip feed it back on again. As a result, budgets and cash flows are going to play a hugely important part of getting businesses back on their feet and ensuring you stay there, which is probably just as important. Without both a budget and a cash flow, how do you really know what your business needs are going to be when you start to slowly open up and open your doors once more? I really can't stress enough the importance of these two tools and how important they're going to play in a role for your business future, your survivability, and your recovery plan. Now, these are probably two of the most fundamental principles in dealing with planning for the future here. So what I'm going to do is, first of all, try and raise a poll, ask you a question here. So it'll take me just a few moments to click a few buttons here to raise a poll. Hopefully, in a few moments' time, there'll be a question on your screen in blue. Fingers crossed this should work. And that question asks you, are you preparing cash flows and budget forecasts on a regular basis? Please click yes, no, or considering. No one knows what your answers are. If you are using an iPad, sadly, unfortunately, the polls don't work for iPads, but hopefully if you're on a laptop or computer, you can use them. I'm not going to leave this poll open very long. And please note, if you've just done a cash flow or a budget for a CBILS loan, then I don't class that as regular. That was just a one-off because you wanted a loan. So, okay, I'm just going to give a few more seconds just to enable you to click on that poll, just probably 3, 2, 1. So hopefully we can close that poll now, and hopefully we can share the results with you. It might take a few moments. So, oh, brilliant. So we've got 77 people preparing cash flows and budget forecasts on a regular basis. That's quite high. I'm not surprised, to be honest. We've got 10% of you know, and we've got 13% of you considering. So hopefully by the end of this session, we might do a similar sort of poll and see whether that may change going forward. So let's just close that poll now. It will take a few moments just to bring us back to the slides. So just bear with me one moment whilst I bring my slides back on the screen. Hopefully in a second you should be able to see my slides. Brilliant, they're there in front of me, so you should be able to see them. Okay, so let's talk about cash flows a little bit more, really, here. Now, you all know what a cash flow is. 77% of you are doing them, you know what it is. But obviously, what you probably don't realise is how important they're going to be in the future. And I can't stress that anymore, really. They are going to play a huge, important part of your business and the future of your business going forward as you look to exit the COVID-19 scenario and plan for opening up your business and seeing what the business environment is going to be in the foreseeable future. We are going to be living in a very different business world. And as I put on the screen here, cash is king. It doesn't really matter how profitable your business is. If you run out of cash, that is the end of the game, sadly. Now, moving on to budgets. Budgets obviously don't really care too much about cash. We're always talking about turnover, we're talking about margin, cost of sales, overheads, and profit. They play just an important part, as cash flows do, in assessing your business needs, in looking at your margins and seeing the state of your business and forecasting going forward to see what you can do and what you need to do for the foreseeable future. Now, I often get asked by clients, which one should I do? Should I be doing a cash flow? Should I be doing a budget? And the answer, I think, is very straightforward, and hopefully you've got the answer too, which is you should be doing both. Why? They are two very, very different things. Obviously, cash flows is all about liquidity, assessing your cash needs, assessing your working capital requirements. How much money are you going to need to survive the next 3, 6, 9, 12 months and beyond? Looking at your solvency. And then we're talking about budget, assessing your margins, your profitability, your expenditure, your overheads. And once you've done that, whether you need to restructure your business, is there something you need to look at to make it more efficient or to adapt to what will be a completely different marketplace going forward? And once you've done all of that, answering a question I put at the bottom in bold, which is your business a going concern? Is it going to be solvent? Is it liquid? And should it be continuing to trade as a going concern? Jeremy will pick up a little bit more on that a little bit later. What I've done on the right-hand side here is I've put a little bit of a table here. It's a very simple table, to be honest with you, but it very nicely just shows the differences between cash flows and budgets, what they have in common, what the differences are, and what the benefits of each of them are. And I would obviously question to you, how can you assess your liquidity and your cash needs without a cash flow? How can you review your solvency without a cash flow and a budget? How can you assess your margins, your profitability, your overhead and expenditure without these tools? How can you know what you need to restructure and where you need to restructure unless you have a budget and a cash flow? And how can you answer that million-dollar question of whether your business is a going concern unless you've done it? So just moving on to budgets and margins now. And I put something on the screen here, what will happen to my business financially? And it's sort of the million-dollar question. Sadly, we don't all have a crystal ball. I don't think anybody has a crystal ball, to be honest with you. We do not know what's going to happen to our businesses. I would be amazed if anybody really knows what the next 3, 6, 9, 12 months are going to bring us. It's impossible to predict. It's a unique situation that we all find ourselves in. However, what you should be doing from a budget and cash flow perspective is you should be running them with permutations, running them with all of the options, seeing what happens if your sales go down or go up, see what happens if you need to lower or increase your prices, building those permutations, those scenarios into your budgets and into your cash flows, and then reacting and assessing the impact on your margins as you go forward. And then what you will need to do is to react. And you might find that sales have dropped, but can you increase prices? Will an increase in price not result in an increased drop in sales? And that in turn may help your profitability and margins. If you're living in a price sensitive marketplace, that is your area for your business, well, can you actually lower your prices? That may result in an increase of sales to help get through it. And all of these scenarios can help look at your margins, retain your margins, and look to the future over what your position is going to be. Now, heaven forbid, you could have the worst case scenario. And the worst case scenario obviously being that sales go down and prices go down. Now, what you need to do with your budgets and cash flows is ascertain what happens with your business should that situation happen. How long are you going to be liquid? How long are you going to be solvent? When do you need to restructure? Do you need to restructure? What time do you think is enough where you need to stop? And then we get on to the, dare I say it, the best case scenario, which is sales are up and prices are up. And strange enough, it doesn't matter what situation you're in, whether your prices are going down, whether your sales are going down, or whether your sales are going up. Budgets and cash flows are just as important when things are on the up, as well as when the things are harder, as we suddenly find ourselves within. And why? Well, strangely enough, I've got a client that's actually doing quite well at the moment. He's in what I'm going to say the COVID area, which is not really affecting him too much. And his sales are increasing. He's a very profitable business as such. However, his customers take 60 days to pay him, yet he has to pay his suppliers after 30 days. That means he has a working capital requirement that's increasing every single month, every single quarter, and he has to assess that on a frequent basis. And he does so by using budgets and cash flows to see what gearing he needs and seeing whether he needs to refinance. And he is in a good position where his sales are up and his profitability is up. Think about your situation. Think about what you need to do. Think about all of these things you need to build into your own cash flows and your own budgets to assess what your working capital requirements are going to be and whether you need to make any difficult decisions going forward. Now, what I've done here today is I've put a little table on the right-hand side here, which I find really useful when looking at budgets and cash flows. Now, I appreciate it's full of numbers. I'm an accountant. Obviously, I'm going to love this table. However, they're quite interesting. You can find these tables all over the internet. I've not made this table up. I've used one from the internet with no copyright as such. And what I'll do is I'll just briefly explain what this table shows. It shows gross profit margins along the top. So maybe you're manufacturing and you're currently having a 20% gross profit margin, or that was your pre-COVID gross profit margin. And say your prices fall, that's the column along the left-hand side, and your prices fall, say, by 2%. Then lo and behold, your sales need to increase by 11% for your margins to remain the same. So this allows you to see what happens should sales and prices go down, and allowing you to build in the permutations and the impact of such things into your budgets and into your cash flows. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to launch another quick poll. Just bear with me a moment whilst I just click a few more buttons here. I'm just going to launch the poll again. You should see another blue screen another blue box coming on your screen. And this one is, do you think or do you feel cash flows and budgets will help your business and the decision making over the next few months? Do you think that these two tools will help you get you through the next 3, 6, 9 months and help with those difficult decisions that you're going to make as we start getting back to the norm? I'm going to say the norm, but I don't think it'll ever be the norm. We're going to live in a completely different business environment. So I'm just going to leave that open for probably a couple more seconds. 3, 2, 1. Can we just close that poll, please? So hopefully we can close the poll and hopefully we can consolidate and share the results with you. Bit of luck. Wow, well, if you look at the results here, 96% of you feel that cash flows and budgets are going to help you in the future. So we've moved from quite a big section of you saying, no, you don't do cash flows or you're considering, to most of you going, it's going to assist you in the future and those decision planning that you need to do for your business. So that's quite interesting to read. Hopefully we can close that poll now. Fingers crossed. Just takes me a few seconds just to bring back my slides. So bear with me one moment whilst I just click the button again, and hopefully you'll have my slides on your screen in a moment's time. Great, you've got the slides on the screen there. I'm going to take you through to the next slide here and to a completely different table. And the table I've got in front of me here talks about sales decreasing and price increasing. So a bit like the other table here, but switched around. I find this one very interesting, to be honest with you. Why? Because it shows that profit margin on the top again, 20 to 60%, depending on where you are. And it shows what happens if you increase your prices around the left-hand side and what can happen to your sales. So if you're running a profit margin of 20% at the moment, and you increase your prices by 2%, lo and behold, your sales can drop by 9%, and you can still have that 20% profit margin. So these tables are very useful in doing your budgets and your cash flows here. So one thing to remember with these things, they talk about margins, really. Margins aren't the same as profits. So if turnover goes down, obviously profit is going to go down unless you're talking about the net profit margin whilst the gross profit margin. Now we have to acknowledge that these things are tools. These things are tools that are used for you to assess your business needs and requirements. You should be using these things to assess your working capital requirements, your cash requirements, your review of your overheads, your review of your business needs, and reacting to it going forward. So let's move on now to the impact of COVID-19 financial support. What we have to acknowledge now is there has been a huge amount of financial support given from the government to businesses. Billions of pounds have been given to businesses. Now, I acknowledge that there is many businesses out there that have not received enough, and there's businesses that have not received any financial support whatsoever. If you're a director that's earning your income through dividends rather than salary, then obviously you've missed out with the furlough scheme as an example. But what we do have to acknowledge is there is a huge amount of support that has been given by the government to businesses across a number of means. And this is the white elephant in the room at the moment. Nobody really wants to talk about. Why? Because at some point in the near future, we're going to have to repay it. And that's something we really don't want to think about for the future. Now, there has been a lot of support out there which has no impact on your cash flow, has no impact on your future outflow of money. Now, on the whole, they're the grants. Obviously, you've got the grants, you've got the £10,000, £25,000 grant. You don't really care about cash outflow there because there isn't cash outflow coming. If I go into the cash flow impacting items, then we've got the likes of deferment. We've got the VAT deferment and the personal tax deferment. Now, the VAT was a welcomed deferment. Obviously, VAT can be a huge cash outflow for our businesses. So when we were told we can defer it, we breathed a sigh of relief, and it helped us get through a couple of months during the lockdown and when our businesses had very little income. But we have to plan for repaying it. That has to be repaid by March. Equally, we've got the personal tax deferment. That's the July payment on account that was due to come up, that we probably won't be paying, and that's going to happen in January. Now, January is always a heavy month for most businesses. Normally you have corporation tax to pay, pay-as-you-earn, VAT, and personal tax. So January is going to have a heavy cash flow impact on your business when you get there. I'm going to skip time to pay arrangements, and we're going to go on to the CBILS and the bounce back loans. Obviously, these were very welcomed loans. This was money coming into our businesses at very low interest rates. Obviously, it helps supporters. But we're going to have to start thinking about repaying them. When? Well, for those CBILS, probably March, April time, that's the same time that we're having to pay our VAT back. Oh dear, it's all going to start coming at once, and it's not that long to go. And then we've got the furlough items. We've got the employer support that's coming out. Now, from August, we've got the national insurance and we've got the pension employers' contributions. That's not going to break the bank for us, but we're having to put our hands into our back pockets in September and October for 10 and 20% of the 80% furlough. That is going to have an impact on our cash flow. We should be building that into our cash flow and our budget to see whether we need to make difficult decisions or not when it comes to, dare I say this, staffing. Moving on to software support now. I was contacted by a client probably about 9 months ago, and he's a reasonably good-sized client, £5 million turnover, so in that SME market, and he said, Alex, you'll be impressed. I've prepared a cash flow, and I've done so on Excel. It took me a week to design, but it's beautiful. And I said to him, I don't know which I'm more impressed with. Am I more impressed that you managed to design a cash flow on Excel, you're not an accountant, or that you managed to find a week of your own time to do it, because that's absolutely ludicrous. There is an awful lot of software out there. Now, I introduced him to one software. I can't remember which one it was. I think it was Fluidly, to be honest. He actually trialed it, he loved it, and he came back to me and said, Alex, nothing beats Excel other than a piece of software that's actually meant to help you with it. And he's used that piece of software with his business going forward, and it helps him immensely. And you should be doing the same. There's a whole host of software providers out there that bolt on to your existing bookkeeping and finance systems. If you're using Sage, if you're using QuickBooks, If you're using Xero, then float fluidly and Futrli link in and bolt on very nicely. If you're a larger business and using something like Sage 200, or you've got bespoke software, then you've got the one at the bottom. Now, these things aren't overly expensive, to be honest with you. They're not going to break the bank when it comes to cash outflow, when it comes to how much we have to spend on software costs. But please note that they are worth their weight in gold. Just moving on now to going concern. And I put a little bit of a extract from a piece of guidance that the Institute of Chartered Accountants recently issued here when it comes to going concern for small businesses. And they said in their guidance that it's the responsibility of directors to, when preparing accounts, to make an assessment on whether the business is a going concern. Now, I'm going to adapt that statement ever so slightly and say actually it is the responsibility of directors to carry out an assessment on whether a company is a going concern on an ongoing basis. Here we are in a difficult period of time, and you should be assessing your company's ability to continue as a going concern on an ongoing basis. Now, what happens if you can't? What happens if you assess your business that is not a going concern? Well, now we're getting on to Jeremy's section. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to invite Jeremy to join us into the session, and he will talk you through the financial solvency and risk side of things. So hopefully Jeremy will be sharing his web camera in a moment. I can see Jeremy, so hopefully you can. Hello, Jeremy. Can you hear me?
Hi, Alex. Hi, Alex.
Brilliant.
Thanks for that.
I'll pass you over to Jeremy. Jeremy, all yours.
Thanks very much, Alex. Well done. Thank you. Morning, everyone. I'm going to go through some of the basic background of financial solvency from an Insolvency Act point of view. So apologies to all of you guys in the audience who actually know all of this stuff, but it's just to set the background. So we'll keep it fairly brief, we'll keep it fairly quick. So Insolvency Act 2006, preceded by the Insolvency Act 1986, defined insolvency, or the test for insolvency, under section 123. And under that section, a company is deemed to be unable to pay its debts where it's proven to the satisfaction of the court that the company is unable to pay its debts as and when they fall due, or it's proven to the satisfaction of the courts that the value of the company's assets is less than its liabilities. There's a couple of other minors: defaults on judgment, default on security, but basically it's about payment. Can you afford to pay when you should pay? Have you got the wealth to make the payment? If you can't pass the tests, time is critical. I'm not going to go through a lot of the things that Alex already talked to you about, because that's just regurgitating stuff he's already very well put across. So time is critical. More importantly, do not keep digging the hole. Seek advice. Your accountants are there to help you, your solicitor, your bank manager, they all want to help. It's very simple. If they lose a client, we have to find another one. We'd rather see you survive at the end of the day. But for God's sake, do not go to the man in the pub who's basically going to tell you he's done it before and he's got away with it, because that's just rubbish and it doesn't work. Look at reorganization. Basic, simple stuff. What are you doing? Why are you doing it? And is there a better or different way? Have a look at what your competitors are doing, see if there's a difference. Are you doing it just because you've always done it that way? And if you are, that isn't a reason for doing anything. Rationalize. Alex has run through a lot of things with regard to this. So cost, what are they? Why have you got them? What are they doing for you? Are they actually earning you any cash? And have you got hidden and buried costs that you don't know anything about? Costs that have been there for ages. An example, professional firms. We're awful at killing off subscriptions to things, magazines, or joining things. We're bloody hopeless at it. And then we suddenly find out we're spending £5 grand a year on something that nobody ever goes to. Restructure. This is essential. It's a combination effect. pick up all the issues that you've identified through seeking advice, reorganizing, rationalizing, and then build it into one ball. You're going to have to do some cutting, you're going to have to do some realignment. But if you don't do it quickly, you're going to suffer. Set the goals and be agile. You've got to measure always and constantly. There is a truth in the old adage. If you can't measure it, you can't manage it. And that's something that Alex has put across very, very well. So let's have a look at what happens when it does go wrong. Is this terminal? Is the process terminal? Well, no, it's not. There's no requirement for it to be terminal. What is essential is early intervention. I, as an insolvency practitioner, and many of the other insolvency practitioners and insolvency lawyers I know, we all have the same problem. Somebody comes to see us at the point at which the fire is actually reaching the roof of the house and asks us how we can put it out. Well, generally, it's just by knocking it down. If you can get in early, we can do all sorts of things. And there are always elements of businesses, usually, that can be salvaged. And why not? A business at the end of the day has built value, it's retained value. Therefore, to throw the value away is a bit like babies and bathwater. It's not a sensible thing to do. And the insolvency regimes that we have in the UK recognise all of that. And they include rescue processes, which are there to actually bring back businesses from the brink, or at least bring back an element of a business from the brink. Can the company start again? So of course it can. It could start with new directors, it can start with the same directors. There are rules, there are bound to be rules, but there is not a penalty for having a genuine business failure. At the end of the day, value is there, contribution is there, and it's not just the turnover of the business, it's contribution to state funds, it's employment, it's all of those other additional matters. And the one that we always get asked again is, can I be a director again? Well, the answer is yes. There are rules. Again, there are conditions. There will be reports conducted under the Directors Disqualification Act. But a genuine failure is a genuine failure. The Directors Disqualification Act is there really primarily to prevent serial failures. In other words, pseudo-criminal activity, or it's there to weed out the director who is so incompetent he shouldn't even be crossing the road without his mum. All right, so let's move on. Law of insolvency before COVID. I took great delight a week after the lockdown in advising the partners in my firm that we were all trading insolvently, which I thought was hysterical. However, Section 214 of the Insolvency Act, 1986, is there for a reason. And what it says is that once a director or directors of a company conclude or should have concluded there's no reasonable prospect of the company avoiding an insolvent liquidation or administration, and that there was no reasonable prospect of it either avoiding entering into, then they must do something about it. If they fail to minimize the potential loss to the company or the creditors, there are consequences. And that goes back very neatly to what Alex has been saying about your cash flows, your budgets, and measuring and being sensitive to what's actually happening. And the consequences are there. In the first instance, financial, it's compensatory, and the position is wound back to where it was. At that point, the directors could well be liable for that compensation. They could be liable to contribute to the diminution in the value of the company's assets. And at the other end, there's the Directors Disqualification Act. And that could lead you to having a report filed on you and eventually a disqualification order being made against you, which could run anywhere from 2 to 15 years. There are very few 15-year orders, I will say straight away. But let's move on to what's a little bit more interesting and topical for where we are and really deals or tries to deal with the COVID issues. And that's the law after COVID. So I've just said Section 214, as was there, has been suspended under the COVID-19 regulations. It had to happen. There was no way that it couldn't happen. And the reason it had to happen was you had the principal creditors of the UK who are creditors in almost every commercial enterprise, which is HMRC saying to people, don't pay us. So that section had to be pulled back, and it has been pulled back. And it's there to deal with the moratorium from HMRC, PAYE, VAT, all of those centralised taxes. We've also got the landlords and the rent position, commercial rent and arrears and recovery. Now, there's some guidelines due on that fairly shortly, but I was looking at some stats yesterday. We're coming up to the quarter day. 75% of commercial rent was collected in the last quarter. Retail sector was only 40%. The figures are expected to be a lot worse coming out now. But the suspension of Section 214 is really about that element of breathing space. It's not there for you not to pay your other creditors and suppliers. The purpose of it is to allow the cash that would have gone to the revenue to stay within your cycle and to keep commerce and trading and all the rest of it turning. If you simply turn around and say, I'm not paying, then you are going to get sued. It's as easy as that. And the courts will support the application against you. So the easy thing to do is to pay. If you can't pay, negotiate and agree something. But just don't ignore someone because they are going to lose, patience with you very quickly. Now, underneath Section 214 lie the antecedent transactions. These transactions have not been suspended, okay? And they have serious consequences for directors in insolvency positions. So let's quickly run through. We've got Section 238, which is transactions as an undervalue, and Section 239, which is a fraudulent preference. And then we have general misfeasance under the Companies Act, and we have unlawful distributions. So transactions at an undervalue. It's simple. Do not be tempted to either sell to yourself or to somebody else an asset thinking, oh, it'll do at that value, because it won't. And don't assume that COVID means that your assets have dropped in value, because they haven't significantly. Fraudulent preferences, don't pay someone because you like them. It's easy. Because if you do feel sorry for them, hard luck. Treat creditors equally and stick to your terms and conditions. That's what they're there for. They're there to protect the creditor and they're there to protect you. Misfeasance, nothing's changed in this at all. Have regard to the company and its needs and the creditor's rights in that company. Just because we're in COVID does not mean that any of those positions have changed. A director still needs to have that wider view of what is beneficial to the whole panorama in front of him and not to an individual element of it. So don't be tempted to suddenly think, oh, my overdrawn director's loan account, I've got 50 grand in the bank, I've just had a bounce back loan, I'll pay myself. Bad idea. Unlawful distributions, an interesting one, this. In fact, I debated it with, I think, someone who's actually a member of the audience, and we couldn't come to a reasonable solution to this one. Many OMBs, SMEs, pay themselves below national insurance levels and then overdraw directors' loan accounts, vote dividends at the end of the year. Fine, we all know how that happens. Supposing your year end was pre-COVID and you haven't paid your dividend, but you voted it. The fact that you voted it then doesn't mean you can pay it now, because you really have no choice. You've got to look around in the current climate and judge what you're viewing, because the whole of what you saw before is not there now. And if you pay yourself and you suddenly are in a situation where you become insolvent, that will be challenged. An insolvency practitioner will pursue you for the return of those funds. So just be careful what you're doing. Think about it. It is something that you need to bear in mind throughout what we're going through at the moment. So if we move on a little bit, as you would expect when we have a crisis, the civil servants love to play, so they keep changing all the rules and the regulations. And they pushed out towards insolvency the Corporate Insolvency and Governance Bill, which is a really exciting title. And what it does is it falls into two sections: permanent measures and temporary measures. The permanent measures basically enshrine a couple of new methodologies for dealing with insolvency positions. They've been talked about in the past for a little while, but they've sort of hurried them up and pushed them out as best they can. And the first of these is a moratorium. And the moratorium is a breathing space. It's debtor-led. Initially, it applies for 20 days. It can extend to 40. It can even extend to a year. with the court's approval, it requires the appointment of an insolvency practitioner as a monitor, and the company must be going forward into this process simply because it's considered it can be rescued as a going concern. What it does do is it stops legal actions. So it brings to a halt any attacks on the company, providing the creditors agree to the positions. If they do, then the ring fencing has occurred. Now, to those of you in the audience who are in insolvency, you will think this is some sort of illegitimate child between an admin and a CVA, and I think you'd be right. I think the process is designed to be easier, and I have a little bit of a Kennedy who was on the grassy knoll theory about this, so I'll come to that in a minute. Arrangements and reconstructions, that's been brought in. So it's an insolvent solvent company process, 75% of creditors to agree, and it approves for the purpose of reconstruction. There's not a lot of detail out there about it, but that's effectively what it does. The other big permanent change really doesn't apply to the OMB SME market. It's termination supply clauses in supply contracts, frustration aspects. So it's really aimed at larger activities. It backs up certain sections of the Insolvency Act, which is 233, 233A, about essential supplies, maintenance of essential supplies going into an insolvency process. Just to give you a flavour for it to be applicable to your business, your turnover's got to be over 10 million, your balance sheet's got to be over 5.1 million, and you've got to have over 50 employed. So you can see it being aimed at construction businesses like that. So the temporary measure, suspension, wrongful trading, done it, talks about it. The other biggie in the background is the suspension of winding up petitions and statutory demands. That came into force and runs until the 30th of June. I have an interesting question here. And if I'd been sharp enough, I'd have done a poll, but I'm not like as clever as Alex. But I don't think the 30th of June is a long enough backstop date. If the floodgates come off on the 30th of June and all these petitions flow back into the circuit, I think there will be an absolute bloodbath out there. I really do. But something that has to be borne in mind, people think that the petition suspension is a petition suspension. It's not. It's a suspension of petitions where it can be established there is a COVID-based reason for the business's difficulty. If you have a non-COVID defence, and that can be challenged by the petitioner, then the courts will grant the petition and all the stat demand if they consider that you are responsible for the debt. It's as easy as that. I do know one instance of a Scottish company that I advised the other day who basically said he wasn't paying anybody. So do as you think, but he's not going to do very well out of it. So further amendments, what have we got? Well, there's a lot of housekeeping gone through about AGMs for the Companies Act and for the insolvency rules and stuff like that, convening of meetings, filings, and all the rest of it. But there's an interesting little bit in the further amendments which actually allows government to bring through further changes at fairly short notice, which is a very wise thing to have, because the one thing that none of us can do is get together for large-scale debates at the moment. It's all right, coming through to the other side. Is it a brave new world? Well, sure it is. I think the COVID-19 debt legacy is going to be huge. Up until now, the state has always been an involuntary creditor. It's now turned itself into a voluntary creditor, and it's now an enormous lender in the UK economy. There's no doubt about it. The timescales for repayment, highlighted by Alex before the March and the January and March 2021 dates, I don't think that a lot of businesses coming back into the marketplace are going to be able to manage to repay the moratorium millstone debt and maintain existing liabilities as they go forward. Because I don't think their turnover and their business model is going to be at the top of its game, basically. I think it's going to take longer. I think we need to have a think about it. And this is my little sort of Kennedy-esque moment, which is why I wonder whether or not the moratorium that's just come through in the CIGB is a government sort of hint at that. Because the simple fact of it is, in every one of those moratorium proposals that comes through, or even the arrangement proposal, you are going to have a significant Crown creditor in there. And it would be an ideal tool for HMRC to turn around and say, we'll agree to that process. And we get a staged repayment of our debt, almost a variation of the TTP. But no, see what happens. The SME OMB market, well, it's got to be flexible, it's got to be leaner, it's got to be more aware, and all the things that Alex has said, it's got to be on top of its game, it's got to be measuring what it's doing, it's got to know where it's up to. And if it doesn't, then it will fall by the wayside very quickly. The way we've worked has changed. We're all getting quite handy at remote working. I must admit, we were debating about this before. In terms of presentations, I prefer to see an audience. I'm not sure that you would prefer to see me, but I'm just thinking about it. You stuck with me anyway, so there you go. The one thing I'm not sure about, though, is flagpoles and fountains. I've talked to a number of my peers in Manchester, and they're all scratching their heads thinking, why have we got all this space? What are we doing this for? Why are we paying all this money to a commercial landlord? What are we getting out of this? Quite a number I talked to have said, the series will probably be breaking in 5 years, so we'll see. Going forward, crystal ball, the landscape's changed. It's never going to change back, ever. Commercial properties I've just mentioned, I think the cityscapes will change. I think retail will change. I'd like to say it would probably slow down, but having seen those ridiculous pictures of queues for people trying to get into IKEA, and God knows what for, I might well be wrong. I think people are adapting to a work-life balance they never thought they had before. I personally am saving 2.5 to 3 hours a day on traveling. Others I know are saving the same. We're all wondering why we don't just sit at home and thumb keyboards. What will be left, though, so long as it's agile, so long as it's lean, it will survive and it will be fit for the purpose, and there will be a marketplace out there. So long as you're on top of your game, you're on top of measuring everything, and you know what you're doing, and you don't do any of the silly things that I've said, for God's sake, don't do. So on that note, I'll wrap up, and I'd like to take us forward. We have a question session, so I'd like to bring Alex back on the screen so that we can try and field any questions between the two of us that have arrived. Alex?
Thank you very much, Jeremy, for that. I think you did really well, Jeremy. You actually brought some time back as well, because I overran horrendously and had to speed up very quickly toward the end of my session, so apologies to everybody there. We'll take just a couple of questions, because I appreciate we're already a little bit overrun on time. So I've just had two come through to me. So my first question I've had through to me is how frequent should I be preparing the cash flow basis for my company? And it's really a difficult question to answer. I think as a minimum, you should be doing it on a quarterly basis, but ideally monthly. And you may seem to think that's an awful lot of work to do, but things are going to change on a month-by-month basis. Your cash position will change. The position of your business will change on a month-by-month basis. So you should be thinking about cash flowing monthly if you can. I think quarterly is probably too far, to be honest. The second question is, what if I've cash flow modeled and I've prepared budget at the moment, they look a complete and utter disaster, and should they don't be continuing? Well, I think the answer to that one question is you need to speak to your relevant partner to see what you need to do, to see whether you do need to restructure your business, to see whether there's things you can do to make those figures look better, to ensure you're not wrongfully trading, to ensure that you have got a liquid and solvent company going forward. Now I'm just going to take two because we're short of time. Jeremy, were there any questions that you wanted to run through?
No, not particularly. In fact, there's not a great deal coming through asking anything about what I do. I think the only thing I would say is that I've had a few people ringing me up asking, what happens if they fail with a CBILS or a bounce back loan, and the answer is the position will be examined at the time. If it's a genuine failure, it's a genuine failure. If you were insolvent at the point at which you took the loan, there'll be a different view taken. A number of people have asked me, what about the furlough cost? Well, it's neutral until the changes come through in August and September anyway. So, back to you, I'm afraid.
Brilliant. Well, I do hope you've all enjoyed that webinar. Feel free to ask any questions, to send us all an email. If you do need any advice on cash flow modeling, if you want some free software examples, so Futurely, if you've got some trials on those, just give us all a call. That's what we're here for. On that note, I'll leave you all to it. Thank you all very much for attending.
Thanks very much, guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye.